Thanks a lot for having me here at this really prestigious conference, alongside so many people whose work I have admired from a distance for a long time and who I finally get a chance to meet today. Now, AI, Lessons to be Learned from Business Ethics was the title that I gave for that speech before I had written it. And as someone who tends to stick to her promises, I seized the chance to travel back in time and look at issues, concepts, and events that have played a significant role in business ethics over the past 2 decades, and consider the lessons that AI companies can learn from them. And I'm also going to highlight which of the ethical questions for AI companies are genuinely new from a business ethics point of view. I talk about the past 2 decades because that's roughly how long I've been involved in the field. I started my PhD in business ethics at the University of St. Gallen 21 years ago, and I've seen so many topics, concepts, and buzzwords come and go during that time. So if I started my PhD in business ethics today, I'm pretty sure there was no way that I could get around addressing AI as a context for business ethics today. Now, a preliminary remark. When I talk about AI companies, I mean on the one hand pure players like OpenAI, but I also mean departments within big tech companies that develop and design AI, because as we will see, these departments often act as if they were companies in their own right when it comes to ethics. Now, I remember back when I started, one of the biggest trends was that thing called globalization, and people associated with it all kinds of fears and hopes, but the business world in particular was very enthusiastic about it. So in 2001, the then chairman of Goldman Sachs published an article in the FT called The Gospel of Globalization, and in it he anticipated massive economic growth and increased global welfare from globalization, and he also hoped that globalization would foster democracy and peace. Now, are we getting to the gospel of AI? Because similar things are also said about AI, or a lot of hopes are associated with AI, at least when we listen to the business world. It will benefit economic growth and global welfare, but does it foster democracy and peace? I am sure many of you would probably hesitate to full-heartedly agree with this statement. Instead, what we hear more often is quite the opposite, namely that AI might mean the end of humankind. Now, I'm not a fortune teller, neither a futurologist, so I'm not going to make any statement about whether I think that's true, and I know there are enough guys here who have stronger and hopefully more competent opinions on that than I. But my point is, when you look at how AI companies deal with business ethics, you sometimes think that this is the first time they ever hear about it. They seem surprised that someone expects accountability from them. They act as if discussions about product safety had never been led before. They think that stakeholders are just shareholders with a typo. Now, big tech companies might even have extensive ethics programs in place, but when it comes to AI, they sometimes seem to forget the very basics. And if we believe that AI has at least the potential to inflict severe damage on humankind, this nonchalance or ignorance should give us cause for concern. In some ways, AI companies' behavior reminds me of the dark times of business ethics when we followed Milton Friedman's infamous maxim, which said, "The social responsibility of business is business and nothing else," or "the business of business is business." But where are we now? The debate on, and luckily also the practice of, business ethics has evolved significantly over the past decades. Now, I'll address some of the key questions in business ethics and see where AI companies stand on them. Now, one of the key debates that dominated business ethics back then was how we can justify non-financial responsibilities of companies. Back then, we used terms like corporate citizenship or corporate social responsibility. Now, today, we use terms like sustainability or ESG, but we basically still argue about the same stuff. When I was a PhD student, there were two ideologically competing fields that would yell at each other at conferences and in bars after presenting. Some said, well, businesses have no moral obligation beyond making profits. Making profits automatically serves the public interest, and ethics only matters if it's good business. If you argued like that, you belong to what I call here the instrumentalist camp, or just straight to freedman. Others said, no, companies need to act responsibly based on a moral duty, and any legitimate business activity must rest on an ethical foundation that goes beyond making profits. This is how the so-called principled people would argue, and I admit I was part of the principled crowd back then. Nothing made me angrier than people who insisted on linking ethics to profits or to the business case. I found it pretty obscene to make ethics dependent on profits, and I still do, but I must admit that I have had to adjust my view on that matter slightly since I have become a consultant. So nowadays my conviction is it is okay to make money from acting ethically as long as you don't stop acting ethically as soon as it does not pay off anymore. So, yet I'd probably lose all my former friends if I said that public. Now, however, when I look at the behavior of AI companies today, I become a bit nostalgic because back then we thought we were on a path to corporate responsibility, to increasing corporate responsibility. Simon Sinek illustrated this path in a Harvard Business Review article in 2004, where he depicted 5 stages. The first level is like defensive level, where companies say, well, that's just none of our business to fix social or environmental or any other non-financial issues. Then he introduced the compliance level, where they said, okay, we'll do however much we have to do in order not to violate the law. Then you got to the managerial stage, where businesses acknowledge, oh, it's a business, stupid, maybe it should become part of our routine. And then you had the 4th level, strategic level, where they see ethics as a USP, or like giving them a competitive advantage. And the highest level would be the civil level, when companies would not just act ethically or take on social responsibility themselves, but also lobby so that rules were implemented that forced others to do the same. But now, where do AI companies stand? I'm afraid that many of them are still pretty defensive when it comes to ethical questions, like non-financial questions. They deny that it's their responsibility to care in the first place, or they just play ignorant, or they put the burden on users by saying, well, AI is just a tool, it's your responsibility how you use it. Yet as regulation enters the scene, they will have no choice but to move to the compliance level. They will certainly produce thousands of pages on reporting for the EU AI Act, and they will probably also call the Big Four, because the Big Four accounting companies are already smelling big business, because auditing algorithms instead of financial balance sheets is going to be a new cash cow for them. But no matter how desirable and necessary regulation is, there is a risk that companies will then make do just with the legal minimum and not go beyond it. So there is no incentive to go beyond the law. But in order to achieve the managerial level, companies must change the routines of how they design and develop AI. They must acknowledge that ethical aspects of AI are not something that you can just leave to the compliance department or to PR and communications. Instead, they will probably appoint a head of ethical AI or head of responsible AI or chief AI ethics officer. And in the end, they will probably implement procedures and standards that make AI ethics part of management systems comparable to how they deal with, for example, organizational health or safety. Now, in order to get to the strategic level, companies must overcome the view of AI ethics as a pure regulatory burden or a tiresome routine, but they must see it as an opportunity to gain a competitive edge. Now, this shift in perspective, what it would take to lift them to the next level, and there are some actors who already put ethical AI at the foundation of their business, like Hugging Face or Mozilla Foundation. And though for them, like calling ethics a strategy would probably be an insult for them, because I'm pretty sure that they see ethics as an intrinsic motivation, and which then puts them in the principled camp that I mentioned before. Now, as I said, final level, civil level would be achieved if AI companies had lobbied for the EU AI Act. No, just kidding. But it would be achieved when AI companies engage in collective action to make sure that the high standards to which they commit themselves are also binding for others. This can also, of course, be smart from a strategic perspective, because by now the AI industry knows that if they don't drive the whole sector towards more responsible behavior, regulation will be harder and sooner, probably. So now that I have talked about the motivation of doing business ethics or accepting responsibility that goes beyond profits, let's look at the scope of business ethics, like how far should the responsibility of a company for their actions extend, like whose needs do they need to respect? These questions gained attention after the end of the Cold War, because as supply chains started to span across the globe, it became common sense. It wasn't just enough to look at what companies were doing at home. We had to extend our views along their entire value chain, and the law and shareholders, as Friedman would have argued, were not just the only things that mattered anymore when we decided whether a company was doing the right thing from an ethical perspective or not. Now, one of the key drivers for the debate on an extended notion of corporate responsibility were scandals like the one about sweatshops from Nike in Southeast Asia in the 1990s, where workers were found to be forced to work under appalling conditions at very low wages. And this was kind of a wake-up call, which also Nike made Nike then the poster child of responsible behavior suddenly, like going from Saulus to Paulus, as you would say in German. Now, this is what the newly defined scope of corporate responsibility looked like. Companies were now not just accountable to shareholders and the law anymore, but along the entire value chain and to a variety of stakeholders. But where do AI companies stand in terms of supply chain responsibility? We know that AI companies like to pretend that their products are intangible and entirely virtual, and that the only humans involved are highly paid engineers doing white-collar work. Yet it has become pretty clear in recent years that this is not entirely true. Because you might know the term ghost work. The term ghost work has been created to denote the armies of gig workers who do very precarious click work somewhere behind the scenes, often in developing countries. Like last year, it came out that OpenAI paid laborers in Kenya $2 per hour in order to make ChatGPT less toxic. We could also say they sacrificed their mental health for the sake of our convenience. Which makes me wonder, have we moved from sweatshops to tear shops? And considering the traumatic nature of the work that these people are doing, we're talking about reading about child sexual abuse in great detail, about murder, suicide, torture, beheadings, incest, self-harm, etc. So even though what these people do might count as white-collar work, the price they pay is high. Maybe not in terms of physical, but I said, certainly in terms of mental health. And the income they get is again very low. But it seems that the tech industry, and with it AI companies, has so far escaped proper scrutiny for the labor conditions along their supply chain. At best, we're having a discussion maybe about the conditions in the mines where they extract the raw material in order to create their hardware. But white-collar jobs far away, why care? Thus, as the ghost work scandals show, AI companies seem to struggle with the concept of responsibility towards stakeholders. And what is more, when we look at my chart and try to apply it to AI companies, we see that it is incomplete, because AI companies face two types of stakeholders that don't feature in classical lists of stakeholders in business ethics. On the one hand, we have people whose data is used to train AI models, and we can call them data providers or contributors, but that implies that they actively chose to share their data. But as we know from many AI applications, this is not the case. And a more neutral term would be data sources. That, however, hides the human aspect of the whole matter, and it clouds also the moral aspect. And so human data sources would probably be the best term, and even though I do find it a bit repulsive, because it makes us think that humans are just a mine from which you can extract and harvest data. But then again, this is probably not too far away from how tech companies really look at these people whose data they use to train their models. Now, let's quickly look at what Mina Murati, CEO of OpenAI, has to say on awareness towards this type of stakeholders.
What data was used to train Sora?
We used publicly available data and licensed data.
So, videos on YouTube?
I'm actually not sure about that.
Okay. Videos from Facebook, Instagram?
You know, if they were publicly available, publicly available to use, there might be the data, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not confident about it.
What about Shutterstock? I know you guys have a deal with them.
I'm just not going to go into the details of the data that was used, but it was publicly available or licensed data. Okay, I guess, let that speak for itself, but it seems there is a long way to go, at least at the top, in terms of awareness for the stakeholders. Now, but who else is missing from the list? Because there's another particular new kind of stakeholder that's not been addressed in business ethics so far. And I have yet again to come up with a new term, or a appropriate term. What I mean is, for example, job applicants who have their CV assessed by AI. I mean social welfare recipients who have their credibility evaluated by AI. I mean credit takers who have their creditworthiness assessed by AI, or patients who have their X-ray evaluated by AI. Now, how should we call these stakeholders? Like end users? That doesn't really nail it, because they don't use AI. I don't want to call them beneficiaries either, because it suggests that they automatically benefit from AI. Affected parties is too broad. So data subjects is an option, but data subjects makes it sound as if they were aware of their status and their rights, and they're not. So I have come up with the not so nice and probably very preliminary term of human objects of AI. Now, but, well, by the way, what might be particularly challenging is, and what is relatively new for business ethics, is that when we come to this type of stakeholders, what is important is to look at their identity characteristics, because the impact that AI has on people when it is used on people heavily depends on gender, race, age, etc. And this identity-based stakeholder perspective is something that's also relatively new in business ethics. Now, let's also look at one of the key events during those past 2 decades that was pretty important, not just in business ethics, but everywhere. I'm talking about the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, probably remember. Now, what can we learn from that when it comes to AI? Well, oops, I have blackout here, well, not here, okay. One of the things that became evident during the financial crisis
was that over several years, banks had launched increasingly complex products. In the end, many investors did not really know what they were effectively investing in anymore, and regulators were hopelessly lost at trying to catch up with regulation. And I remember videos with bankers from that time who were asked to explain how the products that had led to the fall of or the collapse of Lehman Brothers worked, and they just couldn't. Now, while AI applications are in many ways very different from financial products, they share the lack of transparency. It applies to both, or rather, the lack of transparency of in financial products pales in comparison to the lack of transparency that we have in AI. Because despite efforts to arrive at explainable AI, it is often impossible to explain how AI has arrived at its conclusions. Yet, from an ethical point of view, the more power we yield to AI, the higher the stakes in case of mistakes. And we saw what happened in the financial crisis when we let an industry make and lose trillions based on an opaque product. There are more similarities to remember, because another key aspect that enabled the financial crisis was regulatory capture. Regulators were heavily influenced by the very industry they were supposed to regulate. And the political influence of the financial industry was so big that it played a key factor in enabling the financial crisis, because it kept regulators from intervening. Now, where do we stand with AI companies when it comes to regulation, or with big tech, to be more precise? I'd say at a similar place, because big tech leaders often complain or make fun of lawmakers who know zero about AI, but ironically this is partly their fault, because they are the single biggest influence on politics. So either they are not willing or they are not able to explain properly what they are actually doing, and both is worrying. Now, the bigger the influence of big tech on policymaking, the less effective the real regulation will be. And this, if we look back at the financial crisis, in combination with opaque products, does not promise too much for readiness in the event of a crisis. Now, we have talked about AI companies, and we have compared their notions of responsibility and stakeholders to the debate of the past 20 years, and in many ways there is no reason why AI companies should not live up to the same expectations that we have directed at other companies since the Cold War. I've argued that in many ways AI companies are nothing special, but they act as if they were. Their often defensive notion of corporate responsibility, their reluctance to account for the labor conditions in the supply chain, and their ignorance towards key stakeholders are striking. But as I have mentioned while reflecting on learnings from financial crisis, there is indeed something very special about AI companies, and this is their product. We know that a lack of explainability and transparency is nothing new. We've seen that from the financial sector, but the implications of the lack of transparency are much more far-reaching in the case of AI, because the stakes are higher, as I said. The potential for damage caused by AI is bigger than that of most other products we know. And this leads us to the question of product safety. Like, the more impactful a product, the more important its safety, I would say. Now, back then, product safety cases span across a range of industries, from automobiles to pharmaceutical to chemistry or consumer products. And one of the most shocking cases was the Ford Pinto case, probably a few of you remember. But in the 1970s, Ford sold their Pinto cars in the US knowing that it actually contained a deadly design defect. The Pinto would explode at impact from the rear at any speed that was higher than 30 miles per hour. It would explode and people died. And engineers knew that when they designed it and launched a product, but they had calculated that it was cheaper to pay for the wrongful death lawsuits than to fix the design problem. And so this case became a standard feature in every business ethics course. Now, typically in the past, safety cases involved a product, a user, and victims, like the Pinto case. And when analyzed carefully, it usually became quite clear quickly what the problem was, like lack of safety mechanism, insufficient trials, or often, as in the Pinto case, a prioritization of profits over consumer safety. Now, when we look at AI, product safety becomes much more difficult, and I'm not going out on a limb here because the details of AI safety are definitely beyond my expertise. There are more qualified people here to talk about this, but I briefly want to address 3 compounding factors when it comes to AI safety. Again, the above-mentioned aspect of transparency, then the emergence of general-purpose AI, and ignorance. Let's take up transparency again, this time from a safety perspective. Now, how can you guarantee the safety of a product if you don't know how this product works? Without a clear understanding of how AI systems make decisions, we'll never be able to fully guarantee their safety. It's impossible. Plus, as I said, the stakes are higher. When complex financial products were not safe, it meant that you could lose money. When complex AI products are not safe, you can lose your life when applied in medicine, in transportation, in management of critical infrastructure, etc. So yes, the dimensions of safety are different from most discussions on product safety we had pre-AI. Though if we want to take the doomsayer seriously for a moment and act as if we believed that AI has the potential to end humankind, we should not pretend that this is unprecedented. Because what are we seeing here? In the 20th century, the debate on nuclear technology provoked similar thoughts about existential risks. The debates were, however, not part of business ethics, and why is that? It is because luckily nuclear technology was not in the hands of profit-maximizing actors, but of governments, so it was easier kind of to control. And that's why the debate was also led in tech ethics or environmental ethics and not in business ethics. In this context, Hans Jonas, a great Jewish-German philosopher, established the famous precautionary principle in the 1970s. It says, act so that the effects of your actions are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life. Or put differently, do not compromise the conditions for an indefinite continuation of humanity on Earth. Now, the precautionary principle has been well established and plays a key role in environmental regulation. And when I think about this, I can only shake my head when some of the biggest minds who were instrumental in the development of some of the potentially dangerous AI applications now suddenly warn us that their innovation threatens to wipe us all out. What were they thinking while working on it? And to those people who say that this type of precaution stifles progress and innovation, I say progress and innovation are not merely quantitative matters. We always want a certain quality to them. And this means that they must be compatible with a meaningful and dignified human existence. Now, the next compounding factor for product safety concerns the emergence of so-called general-purpose AI, like generative AI, for example. So never before has a company claimed to have developed a general-purpose product, and never before have consumers been confronted with general-purpose products. You bought a toaster, you used it for making toast. If you took it to the bathtub with you, you knew you were violating its purpose, and the toaster company would rightfully reject any lawsuits that would raise against them. But now we have general-purpose AI, and the term itself is pretty ambitious, or should I say presumptuous? Because the question it raises in terms of safety are like, what does AI safety mean for general purpose? Do AI companies that claim to create general-purpose AI really want to accept responsibility for the safe functioning of their product for any single imaginable use case? How would we ever want to test AI safety for every single imaginable purpose? Or is the term general-purpose AI just another piece of evidence for the hubris of an industry that only looks at their outputs in terms of power, but hardly ever in terms of responsibility? So yes, the lack of transparency and the assumption, or rather presumption, of a product that serves general purpose definitely poses new challenges for product safety, not just but also from business ethics point of view. But let's look at the third compounding factor, ignorance. The whole debate is accompanied by a well-known problem, which has been discussed time and again, like ignorance or unwillingness, carelessness or nonchalance. It looks like leaders just don't care about testing. Let's briefly listen to Sergey Brin.
On the image generation, I think it was mostly due to just like not thorough testing.
So yeah, the problem with Gemini and the whole image generation, yeah, you know, it was mostly due to just like not thorough testing. Guess this speaks for itself. But here again, we have it on tape. The very same people who set the stakes extremely high by releasing general purpose AI apparently just don't care to test it enough before releasing it. So wrapping up, brings me to the end of my trip down the memory lane of business ethics with a side eye to AI. What did we learn? Where do we stand? We learn that in many ways the business ethics of AI should not be different from that of any other products, because simple principles apply. Know your stakeholders, know your value chain, and accept responsibility for the safety of your product. But in order to get there, AI companies and their people must stop to feign ignorance and overcome their sense of exceptionalism. Yes, you do create groundbreaking innovation, and some aspects of it are truly exceptional, but when it comes to ethics, we must recognize that like the rock-solid core of ethical business remains forever as follows. It is to act with integrity and to ensure that what you do serves humanity and not the other way around. So, thank you very much for your attention.